Chaitanya Charitamrta Jai Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhakta Vrinda Sugandha, I need my glass. Go ahead.
Hare Krishna, we are having a Srimad Bhagavatam class, so please kindly gather here. No photos at this time. You can take the pictures afterwards, and no wandering around the temple, please. Please kindly have a seat here. Or if you need, you can also leave the temple, but no wandering around.
Thank you. So reading from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrta, this is Adi Lila, chapter 5, titled The Glories of Lord Nityananda Balaram. And we're reading text 51. Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam Tahara Bahire Karanavadnam Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam Tahara Bahire Karanavadam Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam Tahara Bahire Karanavadanam. Anyone else would like to chant?
Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam
Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam
Tahara Bahire Karanavadanam
Tahara Bahire Karanavadanam
Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam
Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam
Tahara Bahire Karanavadanam
Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam
Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam
Tahara Bahire Karanavadanam
Tahara Bahire Karanavadanam
Vaikunta Bahire Jyotirmayadam
Tahara Bahire Karanavadanam
Vaikunta Bahire, outside the Vaikunta planets. Yea, that. Jyoti Mayadam. Impersonal Brahman effulgence. Tahara Bahire. Outside that effulgence. Karana Arnavanam. An ocean called Karana. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Outside the Vaikuntha planets is the impersonal Brahman effulgence, and beyond that effulgence is the Karna ocean, or causal ocean. Please repeat. Outside the Vaikuntha planets, is the impersonal Brahman effulgence, And beyond that effulgence is the Karna ocean, or causal ocean. Purport. The impersonal glowing effulgence known as impersonal Brahman is the outer space of the Vaikuntha planets in the spiritual sky. Beyond that impersonal Brahman is the great causal ocean, which lies between the material and spiritual skies. The material nature is a byproduct of this causal ocean. Karnadaksha Vishnu, who lies on the causal ocean, creates the universes merely by glancing upon material nature. Therefore, Krishna personally has nothing to do with material creation. The Bhagavad Gita confirms that the Lord glances over material nature, and thus she produces the many material universes. Neither Krishna in Goloka nor Narayan in Vaikuntha comes directly in contact with the material creation. They are completely aloof from the material energy. It is the function of Maha Sankarshan in the form of Karnadaksha Vishnu to glance over the material creation, which is situated beyond the limits of the causal ocean. Material nature is connected with the personality of Godhead by his glance over her and nothing more. It is said that she is impregnated by the energy of the glance. The material energy Maya never even touches the causal ocean, for the Lord's glance focuses upon her from a great distance. The glancing power of the Lord agitates the entire cosmic energy, and thus its actions begin at once. This indicates that matter, however powerful she may be, has no power by herself. Her activity begins by the grace of the Lord, and then the entire cosmic creation is manifested in a systematic way. The analogy of a woman's conception can help us understand the subject to a certain extent. The mother is passive, but the father puts his energy within the mother, and thus she conceives. She supplies the ingredients for the birth of the child in her womb. Similarly, the Lord activates material nature, which then supplies the ingredients for cosmic development. Material nature has two different phases. The aspect called Pradhan supplies the material ingredients for cosmic development, and the aspect called Maya causes the manifestation of her ingredients, which are temporary, like foam in the ocean. In reality, the temporary manifestations of material nature are originally caused by the spiritual glance of the Lord. The personality of Godhead is the direct or remote cause of creation. The material nature is the indirect or immediate cause. Materialistic scientists, puffed up by the magical changes their so-called inventions have brought about, cannot see the real potency of Godhead behind matter. Therefore, the jugglery of science is gradually leading people to a godless civilization at the cost of the goal of human life. Having missed the goal of life, materialists run after self-sufficiency, not knowing that material nature is already self-sufficient by the grace of God, thus creating a colossal hoax in the name of civilization. They create an imbalance in the natural self-sufficiency of material nature. To think of material nature as all in all, not knowing the original cause, is ignorance. Lord Chaitanya appeared in order to dissipate this darkness of ignorance by igniting the spark of spiritual life that can, by his causeless mercy, enlighten the entire world. To explain how Maya acts by Krishna's power, the author of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrta gives the analogy of an iron rod and a fire. Although the rod is not fire, it becomes red hot and acts like fire itself. Similarly, all the actions and reactions of material nature are not actually the work of material nature, but are actions and reactions of the energy of the Supreme Lord manifested through matter. The power of electricity is transmitted through the medium of copper, but this does not mean that the copper is electricity. The power is generated at a powerhouse under the control of an expert living being. Similarly, behind all the jugglery of the natural laws is a great living being, who is a person like the mechanical engineer in the powerhouse. It is by his intelligence that the entire cosmic creation moves in a systematic way. The modes of nature, which directly cause material actions, are also originally activated by Narayan. A simple analogy will explain how this is so. When a potter manufactures a pot from clay, the potter's wheel, his tools, and the clay are the immediate cause of the pot. But the potter is the chief cause. Similarly, Narayan is the chief cause of all material creations, and the material energy supplies the ingredients of matter. Therefore, without Narayan, all other causes are useless, just as the potter's wheel and tools are useless without the potter himself. Since materialistic scientists ignore the personality of Godhead, it is as if they were concerned with the potter's wheel and its rotation, the potter's tools and the ingredients for the pots, but had no knowledge of the potter himself. Therefore, modern science has created an imperfect, godless civilization that is in gross ignorance of the ultimate cause. Scientific advancement should have a great goal to attain, and that great goal should be the personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that after conducting research for many, many births, great men of knowledge who stress the importance of experimental thought can know the personality of Godhead, who is the cause of all causes. When one knows him perfectly, one surrenders unto him, and then becomes a Mahatma. Om Gyantimirandasya Ganajana Shlakaya Chakshur Inmiltam Yanatasme Shri Gurve Namaha. So this is a little lengthy purport, but a very important one. This analogies that are given, especially the one about the potter and the pot, are very quite nice. And especially this idea of scientific understanding. So as you study Srila Prabhupada's books, many times he'll point out the fallacy, like in this purport. The scientist, it's interesting, he used this phrase of so-called inventions, I think. He said, scientists are very much enamored by I forget where I saw it. They're so-called inventions that they develop these telescopes and they see the movement of the universe and how it expands and all these things, and they're very much enamored by, Prabhupada describes as the potter's wheel, the movement of the potter's wheel and the clay and all the elements. So they're enamored by the ingredients, the material energies, but they don't consider that there's someone behind that. And there's a wonderful example of this is given. There's a documentary performed many years ago called Expelled, and it shows a picture on the front of an empty classroom. And it was produced by Ben Stein, who was a speechwriter for a couple of presidents, I believe. Anyway, he demonstrated in this video that science, so-called science, the scientific process is you have some theory or idea and you prove tests to prove whether that theory is true or false. And if your data shows that it's false, then you say, okay, well then that theory is not correct because the data doesn't support that supposition. But if the data supports it, then you can say, okay, it's not a theory anymore, it's proven, it's a fact. And we can prove it by demonstrating in this way. And so what's happened, and the point, there's a lot of points made in this documentary, it's quite fascinating. Essentially it shows the danger to society when you take God out of the classroom. And you say there's no God, there's no supreme being, it's just material elements. That leads to atrocities like the Holocaust, where millions of people can be slaughtered, and society tolerates that for some reason. Why? Because they don't have any concept of morality or supreme control. So that's the basic theme to this documentary. But he points out that there's this thing called intelligent design, and the evidence, many scientists, they're not religionists per se, but the evidence clearly shows there's some intelligence at work. If you study DNA, just logically, like a lay person, you don't have to be a scientist, to understand the amount of data that resides in a DNA, you need massive computers to process, because there's so much information contained in the DNA. And that information is so intelligently organized, it requires a lot of computing power to pull it apart. So right there is evidence that, okay, this couldn't have been accidental. Chaos does not, you take a bomb and explode it like the so-called Big Bang Theory, that does not create order, it creates chaos. So how does this chaotic explosion create the very intricate, highly organized organisms that we see? And DNA is just one example. So the point is there's many, many scholars, PhDs, they have tenure, they publish papers, and they'll say in their paper, they don't even necessarily believe in God, or they don't even necessarily believe in intelligent design. They just say things like, there appears to be some intelligence at work in the universe. We don't understand it, but it appears that maybe there's something there. Maybe we could discuss this. And simply for saying that, not saying they believe it, but just saying we should discuss it, their careers are finished. They're given a back office. They can't fire them sometimes, so they put them in the basement, and their papers don't get published. They don't get promoted. Basically, they're finished. Simply for saying the words intelligence. And if they combine intelligence and design in the same paper, finished. Their careers are over. And so they don't do it. But if you talk to them privately, they'll say, obviously there's intelligence at work. It's quite, if you look at any direction very deeply, you look up in the stars, you look down in the atoms, you see intelligence. So many of them are quite, it's not even convinced, it's just, it's a scientific fact that this is intelligence. If you tell somebody, this iPhone, where did you get it? Oh, I found it in the desert, it just organized itself out of all the elements. They would say, well, this person is not thinking clearly. And yet that's what the scientists say. This whole universe with this, how many degrees can we live with? Are too hot, too cold? There's a very small margin of comfort that we can survive life. And oxygen, so many ingredients are necessary for life on the planet. Yeah, that just all accidentally arranged itself. So there's many, many examples. But the point is, of this documentary is that the evidence shows, it goes in one direction, it shows, oh, there's some intelligence at work in the universe. But we can't follow that evidence. We have to put a wall and say, no, we can't go there. We're just going to say it's all matter. So that's what this purport is saying. The scientists, they're just concerned with the material elements. Well, there's no God, there's no force, because we can't see it. Well, because your instruments are material, all you're going to be able to measure is matter. And they won't accept any other conclusion. So that's one point. And so you see over and over again in Srila Prabhupada's teachings that he rails against the scientists for cheating people, because they're making these statements that about life and reality with a small fragment of the whole picture. And they're not teaching the science of the soul, or the science of spiritual realization. Science of Self-Realization is one of his books. They're not teaching that in the schools. He tried to convince the Board of Education in South Africa, you should teach this Bhagavad Gita in the schools. And they said, no, we can't. We're a secular school. We can't teach religion. He said, no, this is not religion. It doesn't matter if you're Hindu, Christian, Catholic, which is Christian, or Muslim, or whatever religion you may have, your body's going to get old, hair's going to turn gray, and then you're going to die, and then the soul's going to move on to another body. Whether you believe in that or not, it's going to happen. And so that's not a religion. Whatever religion you have, or if you have no religion, the body's still going to grow old and die, and the soul's going to move on. And the proof that there's a soul is because when it's not there, the body's dead. All the same material elements are there. Nothing's changed chemically, biologically. But there's a soul and you have life, no soul, no life. This is science, and it's not religion, and you should teach it. And they weren't convinced because people have this concept of different distorted concept of what religion is and what it isn't. So the point is that Prabhupada was very clear on trying to get people to understand. He had an interesting discussion. He had a group of scholars in Los Angeles in his garden. And he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically told them, because at this time it was in Los Angeles in the 70s, and this brainwashing was going on. Devotees were getting kidnapped and tried to deprogram. There was accusations against the movement, Srila Prabhupada, that they were brainwashing these young boys and girls. And so there were court cases. There was one in New York, and different court cases where they were saying this is a cult. This Krishna conscious movement is a cult. And so at this time, all this term brainwashing was a very loaded term. It was going on a lot. Of course, these court cases are proven. The judge said, no, this is a bona fide religious practice. They're not brainwashing. That sort of finished it. But it was very dramatic and many years in the making. So during this time, Prabhupada, this term brainwashing came up, and he looked at all these scholars right in the face and said, so I'm taking these children, they're saying we're brainwashing them, I am brainwashing them. I'm washing their brain of all the nonsense you have taught them, and now I'm teaching them reality. This is a good thing, yes? And they all nodded, yes, yes. And these are the professors that are teaching in their schools about evolution and Darwin and all these materialistic concepts. So Srila Prabhupada was very clear and firm in understanding what is science and what is not science. So we've talked about, what is not science, and then he would use these terms, sort of uncovering or not sort of, but directly uncovering the fallacy of the scientific supposition, of the scientific approach of, the stars there in the universe, there's all this movement and it's just happening accidentally. No, it's just like the potter and the potter's wheel. There's a potter who's making the wheel spin, making the pot. Let's talk about the potter, because he can make so many pots, but the clay can't do anything without the potter. So what's more interesting, the clay or the potter? Wow, how do you do that? How do you design this pot, and how do you make it like that? That's interesting. They talk to the clay with the clay. Clay says, I just do whatever he tells me to do. But the scientists aren't interested in that. They just want to focus on the clay. And they might get enamored by the spinning wheel. Oh, there's so much spinning, and so they look at the universe. Oh, there's this expansion. And well, that's fine. But to this day, I could be wrong, but I've yet to hear an answer to this. And my understanding is scientists still do not understand electricity. They can manipulate it, but they really don't know what it is. And the same with gravity and so many things. They can manipulate these things, but they can't really explain what they are, how they come into being. If you could really understand it, you could recreate it. But they can't do that, they just manipulate. And that's why he says so-called inventions. Everything we see in modern society, artificial intelligence, computers, all these things, we're simply manipulating what's there. We're not creating anything original. So Prabhupada would unmask this non-scientific use of the word scientific in these different ways. And then he would also turn around and use the word scientific in very profound ways. He instructed some of his PhD disciples, Bhakti-Swarup Damodar and Sadhaputta Prabhu. They had PhDs, one in mathematics and one in Sadhaputta was mathematics, I believe. Bhakti-Swarup Damodar was in physics. And he said some very profound things. He said, you should use, since you understand matter, and you understand this scientific pictures, and speaking of pictures, Sadhaputta, when he first saw these books, they have pictures in them. I don't know if I can accept them as being scientific, because all these illustrations. And then as he read it, he said, oh, this is the topmost truth. So Prabhupada said, so you should take your understanding of this scientific process in physics and mathematics and prove scientifically how God is real. So if you ever think it's not provable, that the Prabhupada's point was, seeing God, seeing the absolute truth is not about faith. It's a scientific reality. And if you increase your knowledge and understand that, then it's easy to see him, and it's easy to explain to others how he exists, because it's a fact. One of the greatest disservices the British did, and it was way before my time, but it still disturbs me very deeply, is the British hired some scholars, Max Muller was one of them, different German scholars and others who knew Sanskrit, and they understood the culture, the Indian culture and philosophy was so rich that the people had such strong bonds that they would never be able to rule them in years gone by. And so they said, so we have to break their faith in these scriptures, because they're too strong as a culture. So they hired Max Muller and other scholars, translate the Vedas, translate Mahabharata, and the Bhagavatam, Bhagavat Purana, and the Vedas, Upanishads, translate them into English, because at that time, British rule, English was considered the language everyone should be learning. But when you translate them, this was specific instructions, when you translate them, do it in such a way that people will think these are myths. Myths. M-Y-T-H. That they're not real, they're just stories. Oh, there's stories my grandmother told me about Lord Ram. There's stories about Arjuna and Yudhisthira. Sariputta Buddha is convinced that he could prove that Arjuna, Yudhisthira, Pandavas existed in the battle of Kurukshetra, which is what Bhagavad Gita is all about. It really existed. There's a document in Jagannath Puri where they record every king. The king right now, the king before him, the king before him. So they can show all the kings that ruled Orissa. You could take that document and other documents and you could prove, establish historically. The Bhagavad Gita is a historical event. It's not a mythological, the Pandavas represent the five senses and all these others. So impersonalist understanding said, no, Arjuna was a person, Yudhisthira was a king, there was a war, a lot of people died, Krishna was there, he instructed Arjuna. These are historical facts. And so the point is, in this way, that scientists in modern atheistic society tried to get people to think, no, these are just stories, and there's not really a God, it's just matter, and it's just evolution, and all these things. So there's much wonderful work's been done, of course, by Srila Prabhupada, also Sariputta Prabhu and Judah Karma have written books about forbidden archaeology, showing all the evidence that pokes holes in Darwin's theory, that there's evidence showing man existed long before modern science accepts. So the point is that these spiritual realities, 2 points basically, these spiritual realities that we take to heart because we've experienced them, they're based on scientific fact. God is a person, he exists, his energies are absolute. One proof of that, if someone says, no, you have to prove God exists, okay, we can prove God exists. You will get old. Do you believe in time? Yes or no? And the person says, no, I don't believe in time. It's a material construct. It's not real. Okay, fine. You don't believe in time. Then that means you won't get old, your hair won't turn gray, and you'll live forever. And your house will never need to be repainted, and you'll never have to repave the roads, because time doesn't exist, so nothing will ever deteriorate. But that can't happen. Whether someone believes in time or not, they're going to get old. Their hair will turn gray, their body will change, because the time factor wears everything down. Whether you believe in time or not, it has an absolute effect upon the material energies. Things deteriorate over time. Everybody experiences that. So that right there is proof that God exists. Time is a form of God. Time is an absolute. You can't control it, you can't stop it, it's going to have an effect, and that's an absolute. So, and it's described in the Shastras that time is a form of Krishna, it's a form of God. So there is just one small scientific evidence of God's existence. But this was a point that Prabhupada's making in here is very interesting about the potter and the potter's wheel, is that material science and materialists in general are very fascinated by manipulating material energies because they're perceivable, they're tangible. We can feel them, we can touch them, we can see them, we can measure them. But when we talk about spiritual realities, that because they're more subtle, then it's hard for materialistic people to acknowledge them. But on a deeper level, because when you start talking about the subtle material, and of course there's subtle material energies, mind, intelligence, and ego, those are interesting and fascinating and very powerful, but ultimately, from a spiritual perspective, they're just almost as, I want to say useless, I shouldn't say useless, they are useful, they have a purpose, we can use them to engage in spiritual life. But the material energies aren't so interesting from a perspective of providing satisfaction to the soul and purpose to our lives. And so the problem that if we don't understand or accept these spiritual realities, like many materialists, part of the reason is because as soon as we accept some spiritual reality greater than myself, then we have to come to a point of surrender. If there's something greater than me, then that means I'm not the greatest. Then that means I have to adjust my worldview or my reality to the greater reality and fit in with, okay, well then what is the absolute? What is the purpose behind everything? And as soon as I enter that discussion, I have to accept at some point I'm going to have to surrender that and adjust my vision to the greater vision. And generally speaking, that's what materialists don't want to do. They're not about to surrender. None of us, surrender is a hard, none of us naturally, I shouldn't say that, naturally the soul is a surrendered servant of Krishna, but because we've been so conditioned by bad habits, we become so enamored by the material energies, we have forgotten the sweetness of surrender. We think it's a painful, difficult thing. You could think of surrender. One interesting, I think it was Mahatma Prabhu once said that if you replace the word surrender, because when you think of surrender, is that sometimes that's not we're not eager to do that. Well, okay, I'll force myself to surrender, because surrender has connotations of, well, I don't know if I want to surrender. But if you think of trust, then that's easier. In other words, is it easier to think I'll surrender to Krishna, or I will trust Krishna? Which of those is more palatable? For me, trust is, I can trust him. Krishna's wonderful. Surrender? Okay, I'll surrender because I have to and I should, and I know I'll feel good if I do it. But immediately, surrender, there's resistance. Surrender, I don't know if I can surrender. But can I trust? Well, that's easy. Oh yeah, I can trust him. Maybe in the beginning, I don't know, it might be a little bit harder, but the wonderful thing about Krishna is you trust him just a tiny little bit, and then he reciprocates, and you feel wonderful. Oh, well that was nice. Well, maybe if I trust him more, and it works every time. Every time you trust him, then he reciprocates, and it's easier and easier. But anyway, the point is that this mentality of not wanting to trust or not wanting to surrender is what causes materialists to rule out any dimension other than the material. And so I've kind of jumped around in different ways, but maybe I'll stop for questions. But that's the point, at least for me, in this purport, in this verse. I mean, he talks about the causal ocean and Karna ocean and things that I'm not really qualified to speak of because they're outside my range of understanding. But in this purport, Prabhupada talks about these different, the glancing power and the creative power in the different ways to perceive and understand that the material elements and their manipulations are not what should interest us. Because they just, over and over and over, they keep doing the same thing in new ways. They make us think it's new, but there's no enjoyment to be had from manipulated material energies. The enjoyment has to do with relating with the potter, not the clay. And so we want to interact with the Supreme Lord. And that would give pleasure to the soul and meaning to our lives. And it's scientific. It's a process. If you perform this step and this step and this step, you'll achieve this. So what does scientific means? Here we talked about the theory, the data proves the theory or not. Okay, once you've proven it, you can publish the results. Anybody can do that same thing and they'll get the same data because that's scientific. If you do this and if you mix 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen, you'll get water. I don't believe you. We'll try it. Go into your lab. I don't know how you mix oxygen and hydrogen. Somebody knows, obviously. But you mix them, they have cars that run off hydrogen, and the smog they produce is water, because they break apart the hydrogen and oxygen, or something like that. I don't understand how they work. But the point is, scientific process, you follow this step, you get this result. And anybody does it, any language, any country, and it works. And so this Krishna consciousness is scientific. You chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, you follow the regular principles, you surrender your life to Krishna, your soul will be satisfied, you will be happy, guaranteed. And sometimes people say, well, it's not working for me. And if you examine very closely your life, well, okay, you're not following the process. You're doing this, but then you're doing this. Committing offenses, or not chanting attentively, or whatever. There's so many different things. And so the devotee's life is focused on, let me follow the process as purely and as enthusiastically as I can, and when they do that, Krishna reciprocates. And we realize the identity of the soul. We experience, I'm a spiritual being. Krishna is a person. It's real. He reciprocates. Wow. Okay, what was that? I want to feel that again. Okay, so I'm going to get up the next day and do it again, because every time we do it, we experience this reality. It's scientific. And those of us who have, or those of you who have, it's not me, but this, as Prabhupada described, Mayapur, they're building a wonderful planetarium. So our job as devotees is to use whatever, and it doesn't mean you have to be a PhD or a scientist. Prabhupada, when his first devotees came in New York, they'd come in the temple for 3 days or a week, and he'd say, "Why don't you give Bhagavatam class?" Well, I've only been coming for 3 days, how can I give class? He said, "No, you came back, you came once and you came back again. Why did you come back again? You had some realization, so speak on that realization. Otherwise, if you didn't ever come back, then you're here. So obviously you came back for a reason. Well, what is that reason? Speak on that realization." So all of us can do that. You simply speak. I had this experience, and I know this is true because of this, and that affects people very deeply. So that's our job, is to demonstrate scientifically how this Krishna consciousness is real. Very profound. Can you imagine proving God's existence scientifically? This is the task they were given. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to try not to go over today like I did yesterday, and see if there's any questions or comments or corrections. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you for that wonderful lecture. Just a little comment. Having been in science, scientists usually say that the universe came about, consciousness came about by a combination of matter, which was Srila Prabhupada's main criticism of science. But the scientists have no explanation of how the matter came about. So they assume that this matter existed, and that gave rise to consciousness, which is much deeper and much richer than matter is. But they have no explanation for how that matter existed in the first place. So that is equally, in their language, dogmatic, because they're supposing that this matter already existed. So they're pretending to be more profound than they actually are, because they don't have an answer to how, well, you're explaining the second thing with this first thing, but how did this first thing even there? You don't have an answer for that. So, what is your basis?
Yeah, where did the matter come from? There's a joke there's a joke like that. I tend to think in simplistic terms, that the scientists went to God and said, "Okay, we figured it out," because in the Bible it says God created man, and so the scientists figured out, well, we figured out how to create man, and God, so we'll have a contest, and then if we can create man, which we think we can, then we can prove there's no God, that we don't need God or something. So God said, "Okay, fine." So the scientists went to pick up some dirt to create man. God said, "No, wait, you get your own dirt." To your point that, their whole supposition is based on something that they don't know where that thing originated from. Where did matter come from? Oh, there's a big bang. Okay, even if there was a big bang, who caused the big bang? Where did the elements the bang come from? What caused the explosion? And yet everything else they'll say, well, we know all this. Well, how do you know all this if you don't know this? And it's interesting, your point about consciousness comes from this, but you don't know where this comes from, so how do you know that's where consciousness,
And what the Bhagavad Gita provides for them is actually a much better philosophical alternative, because devotees can say, well, look, matter is eternal and consciousness is eternal. That is symmetric, it didn't have to be created magically at one point. It's eternal, it was always there in the past and will always be there in the future, and they're simultaneously there, so which is more palatable philosophically, so things like that.
There was heavy resistance to this. So I think you had a comment? So we have in the back, get the microphone.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, thank you for the wonderful class. I just had a question. So I was discussing on this very subject matter with my uncle. I still don't know if that was the right thing to do, but unlike him, I'm not a scientist, he is. And when we were discussing, he put forth a question that I could not answer that well, so if I could get some guidance on that. So when we give argument that you see something that is designed that's so intrinsic, it's such magnificence, like you give an example of the potter's wheel, like Prabhupada talks about the potter's wheel. That did not come out of itself, it's a potter who's sitting behind it. So, but then when we go back to it, if we consider God also who created everything as a very complex machine, because if something is complex and God created it, definitely God is more complex. So who created God? So when we go to that, and I said that has to be taken as an axiom that God existed, because like in mathematics you have axioms, this also has to be taken as an axiom. So is there a better argument to that than just saying it's an axiom, to that God is also a complex machine and somebody has to create God in the first place?
Well, that's a great point. I don't know if I can answer that. I will try. Two things come to mind. One is the scientists, and maybe some of you know what these are, and this applies whether you're in mathematics or physics or any discipline. There's certain, as you say, axiom, there's certain laws that they accept, like the law of gravity, right? And that's a simple one. But I think in physics there are certain theories, and in mathematics there's certain things they accept, and they can't explain how they work, they don't understand them, they don't know if they're real, but they just accept them. There's certain laws, and I wish I'd give you an example. In fact, there was a story on NPR, National Public Radio, about this. It was a discussion with physicists, and they were saying how, well, all of our work is based on these other theories and concepts that we have to accept, because all of our work would just dissolve if we didn't accept them. They don't understand them. They don't even know if they're true. But they have faith in them, because so many physicists, mathematicians have acknowledged, oh yes, this makes sense. But the point is, there's a tremendous degree of faith in the scientists, physicists in their world. They accept laws and principles to be true, and they make their whole argument based on that, but they don't know if that thing's true or not. They can't prove it. But they have faith in it. So us having faith in these scriptures are no different than them having faith in their scriptures. They'll probably argue that, but the reality is they do. So that's one point. In terms of, to your deeper question, I'll just kind of say two things. One, some people you'll never convince because they don't want to be convinced. So they'll simply juggle their words to not be convincible. But one thing that's essential in spiritual life to make advancement to any degree is this concept of achintya, that we have to accept, and this probably won't work in your case because scientists certainly aren't going to accept this, but we should understand it, that God is inconceivable. Achintya means inconceivable. And by nature, he's supreme, he's absolute. And the very concept of absolute, whatever God does is perfect. It's right, because he's God. For us, it might be wrong. God can't break any rules because he makes the rules. And so we get into this realm of achintya, inconceivable. If there are things that we will never understand, and if we're not comfortable with that, our spiritual progress is blocked. Because we want to be God. We want to think, I can understand everything. And so if I use this argument and that argument, but at a certain point, we will not understand everything. And if we can't accept that, then our mind is going to be blocked. So that's one thing you should understand. Whether a scientist understands or not, good luck, because chances are they won't accept that. But the other... I think you're right. A machine is complex. That means, God must be much more complex. The Vedas describe that actually all that complexity, yes, Krishna's more complex, but he doesn't have time for all that complexity. He gives that to Lord Brahma. Lord, you guys go and deal with the complexity. I want to go play with my friends. I'm busy. I don't have time for all this complexity. I'm not going to the office. So he instructs Lord Brahma, go create the universe, and Brahma gets bewildered. How do I do that? So Krishna inspires him. Here's the intelligence to do it. And Lord Brahma does it, but Krishna's too busy playing to deal with the complexity. It's not important to him. The whole material universe actually is for us. It's not for him. Krishna does not need a material universe. We asked for it because we want to forget him and go play and get distracted. But so I can't give you a good answer to your question. The best one is probably, and we could look them up, I don't know if anybody knows, so what some of these axiomatic or truths are that they accept, because you could counter him and say, well, yeah, we accept that God is the originator of everything, just like you accept that this law proves that physics says this and mathematics say that. I don't know if that makes sense or if that helps.
That does, so that was my argument. So I was just trying to, that puts, in their words, that puts us to the same level as them.
Right.
So I didn't want that. I wanted to gain upper hand. As a presenting Prabhupada.
Well, there are devotees, and that's what, Sadaputa and now there's others up and coming. There's are devotees who could probably give you. Radha Raman is, very brilliant. There are probably better solutions for that discussion. I'm not that intelligent. At some level, if they don't want to be convinced, they won't. Here's a fascinating thing, and I'll just close on this. The documentary I mentioned about Expelled. So he's basically showing that this whole idea about intelligent design and how modern science doesn't accept it. So there's a culmination at the end where he interviews Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is probably one of the leading atheists of today's time. He's written many books. One of them is called The God Delusion. And so he interviewed him at the very end. It was kind of fascinating scene. Anyway, they get in this interview, and Ben Stein says to Richard, "So Richard, you've written this book about your God delusion, so you don't believe in God?" "No, of course not." "You don't, what about the Christian God?" "No." "What about the Hindu God?" "No." "What about Islam?" And Richard's getting noticeably, no, none of them. He said, "Well, Richard, what happens when you leave, you die?" I don't think it's to leave your body, but what happens when you die and you get to the heavenly gates and God says, "Richard, I gave you this $6 million book contract and I did this and that. Why are you telling everybody I don't exist?" And Richard says, this is very, very profound. Richard says, if God exists, he's gone to great lengths to hide himself. Okay? Now just park that statement in your mind. He's gone, this is coming from the leading atheist of today. Very intelligent person in terms of CPU brain power. If God exists, he's gone to great lengths to hide himself. So now turn to any probably of Prabhupada's books, and it's in the Bhagavatam and many places, that Srila Prabhupada describes, if you want to forget God, God will give you the intelligence to forget him forever. Right? Krishna is so kind. It's kind of a scary thought. It's a little unnerving. Krishna is so kind. He lives in the heart. He senses your desire before you're aware of it. And he fulfills that desire. Okay, you want to go to the material world, you want to enjoy, fine. You want to be a king, fine. You want to be a CEO, whatever you want to be. Of course, you have to earn the karma and you have to do things to qualify for some of our desires. I might want a Ferrari, or I might want so many things. I might want to be this, that, or the other thing. It doesn't mean it's going to happen without some effort. And it might not happen in this lifetime. But the point is that Krishna, because he wants you to be happy, okay, if you want that, I'll give you that. He doesn't want us to have it, but he's not going to force us to desire the right thing. So if we want to experience reality without him, okay, here's the material world, I don't exist, you go and be the controller. So he will, and it states this in Bhagavad Gita also, in many places, but that if we, whatever reality or desires that we want to live, he will sustain our faith. He says that about the demigods. If you want to worship a particular demigod, I'll give you the faith in that demigod to worship him. So if we don't, if we want to control, manipulate, and we don't want to surrender him, he will make our faith firm. Prabhupada gives a beautiful lecture to this about how he was an actor, and when he was a child, he did a play of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. And they had arranged for a very leading, famous actor to come and teach the children how to do this acting. And because he was wondering, why are they making it so serious thing? They're making us do this, making us do that. And during the play, Prabhupada peeked out during the curtains at the audience. And the audience had tears in their eyes because they were so immersed in the pastime that they thought it was real. And so Prabhupada describes in that explanation that Krishna, from within the heart, if we don't think this material world is real, we can't enjoy it. The whole thing becomes sand in the sweet rice. It's just miserable. And so Krishna will give us the illusion, oh, this material world is real, and you're important, you have this position, go and enjoy, because then we can enthusiastically try to enjoy. If we don't have that illusion, we can't enjoy. And so, in that regard, so Richard Dawkins, he's saying, well, God's invisible. Yeah, because you want him to be invisible. So he is. So some arguments will never work because their consciousness is such that they'll see what you're saying in a different way. They'll see it to support their cause. So.
There's one last comment that I would like to make. That's something that I came from that conversation, that like scientists have to prove for something to be existing, but the best thing is that none of the scientists can prove that God does not exist. So if we go to a scientist and he or she says that I'm an atheist or I do not believe in God or God does not exist, he or she is being unfaithful to their own tradition.
Yeah, give some evidence for it.
Because they can. The best thing they can say is, I do not know it, because if they have a stand that there is no God, that's not even right from their own definition of science, because they have to give a proof of God not being there.
Yeah.
That's not possible. So, because I ran into a lot of scientists who said that, I don't believe in God because God.
Give me some evidence he doesn't exist.
Well, that's unscientific in its own.
Yeah,
Even in their definition of science, not what to say.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Thank you for that. Okay.
Just a observation from your, the first example that you gave about science and scientific calculations being based on assumptions, beliefs that are not provable. It occurred to me when you were saying that in people on that path of science, their science is actually faith-based.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it very much is. It's very much faith.
I think you want to say something.
Hare Krishna, thank you. Very nice lecture, and you touched on many points.
Closer.
But, just permit me to say a couple of things. According to our traditional philosophers, like one of the most profound philosophers is Sripad Acharya, who is the founder Acharya of Sampradaya. In one of his books, he says very clearly, nobody can prove or disprove the existence of God. The question is not to prove the existence of God. If God could be proven, his argument is like this, if God could be proven, then he would be a derived reality, because you can prove something only on the basis of some fundamental premises. So if God is something which can be proven, then there is something more fundamental than God with which you are proving that God exists. So therefore, because God is the most fundamental premise or the most fundamental axiom,
You need some evidence to demonstrate something.
the question should not arise, can you prove God? It is a foolish question to ask, can you prove God? What is important, he says, is to understand the nature of the absolute truth or the cause of all causes. Like the Brahma Samhita says, Ishvara Parama Krishnaha Satchidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govindaha Sarva Karana Karanam.
There's nothing.
We are trying to understand Sarva Karana Karanam, and we cannot understand with our speculation. So the Sarva Karana Karanam, the cause of all causes, is Ishvara. He is a Lord. Something matter cannot be the cause of everything. Paramaha, and he is the Supreme. Krishnaha, and he has a name Krishna. Satchidananda Vigraha, and he is pure Satchidananda. Anadir Adi. Anadir, that question, who created God or why God is more complex, something that doesn't arise. Anadir Adi. So what is important is not to prove God, but what is important to understand what is the nature of God. And the nature of God can be understood only from God himself.
Yeah, it has to be revealed.
He himself reveals, I am this. That's why if you see the Bhagavad Gita, everything so profound, but really speaking, it's just Krishna telling everything about himself. I did this, I am that, I am this, I am that. There is really no proof. It's a statement. Krishna says, I have created all the demigods. There is no proof. He can say that because he did it. He's just revealing himself. The Bhagavad Gita is a revealed science. It is the revelation of Krishna himself. So therefore, what is important is this whole question of proving. We can give reasonable arguments for people who are in the mode of ignorance to make them have the faith. But the real scientific person, who is really a true scientist, will realize that question is foolish to prove whether God exists. Because something must exist from which everything has come. So what is that something and what is the nature of that something? So it is the nature of God that we need to investigate rather than whether he exists or not. Because it is to be taken that something exists, which is the cause of everything. Scientists are saying the cause of everything is matter which is unconscious. Our scriptures are more profound. They tell that which has caused everything is full of consciousness.
Yeah.
Satchidananda.
Yeah.
That is so.
It's interesting
this is
that
more profound philosophy than the materialist philosophy, which says everything has come out of some intelligent, unintelligent matter. So intelligence, as you refer to the intelligent scientists who believe in intelligence, there exists some intelligence. So they are only able to say there exists some intelligence. Some of these wonderful scientists who are, as you say, they are sanctioned or banned from publishing papers or being given promotion. So those people, they can only go up to that point saying there must be something intelligent. But here, that very intelligence which we believe that there must be something intelligent, that very intelligence speaks in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, revealing himself, I am this, I am that, I have done this, I have done that. So it's a very simple descending process. Just listen to the person who created. See, I was just thinking that let's say I make some upma, cooking. If I believe, if fundamentally I believe somebody, how did the upma come about? I could make a theory, I could prove that the upma took about 1 billion years to produce. Because I'm fundamentally thinking there is nobody who did it. But when someone, if I assume that someone, a cook has cooked it, I know he would have cooked in 20 minutes. But if I have to speculate, it must have come. It must have come on its own. How did the whole thing, how did it go on top of the stove? How did the whole thing happen? I can give a false theory and that will be correct too. That will be correct too. But my conclusions will be wrong. Oh, it took so many years to make the upma or whatever other dish you want to make. But if you go by the person who made, hey, I made it. Why are you speculating? I said I made it in 20 minutes. So why you have to sit and speculate? Oh, when did it come? Everything must have a cause from that. If you speculate, you can come with all weird theories. That's what the scientists are saying. They are not ready to listen to the person who did the job of creating. Krishna says, therefore, we have to accept any reasonable person who really knows the science, the ultimate science and philosophy. He will know, I am being foolish to ask the existence of God. I must know who is God. And let me see who has the audacity to claim I did everything. Nobody in the universe has had the audacity to claim I created the universe except Krishna. He is saying, and nobody can refuse. And that's what Prabhupada says in that purport in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says and Arjuna says, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Pavaramam Bhavan. And then it's Asito Devalo Vyasa, Swayam Chaiva Bravishime. You are yourself saying, Asita is saying, Narada is saying, Devala is saying, all the rishis are accepting. And whatever you say is the truth. Sarvam etad ratam manye.
Yeah, so the question is, this is true, and we accept this. It's interesting that Prabhupada made that statement to the scientists, and said, you should prove God's existence. Because Prabhupada gave that instruction, so that's interesting. One other question here, somebody had their hand.
The way to prove to them is to make them understand that they're asking a foolish question.
Well, so we need to understand what Prabhupada's reason for giving that instruction. Because he was very clear, he said it in several places.
I'm not sure if that goes here, the one for example, as a scientist and all that, but actually I'm very happy that Prabhupada just said what he did, because what I wanted to say at the beginning was, to be quite honest, the scientists who chose a very, very specific kind of thing to follow, those and say that everything needs to be proven, they barely exist anymore. The ones that are very famous and have an enthusiasm and go on stage like Richard Dawkins or even Christopher Hitchens, who's passed away, those are the ones who cause the limelight. So the real question is not asking for proof because we cannot prove. It suggests that, as Prabhupada was saying, if God is a machine, then therefore there are more fundamental mechanics that suggests he came from something else. The idea is that God is a singularity, right? There's nothing before or after, it's eternal. That's the nature of God. So the nature is key. But what I'll say is that there is a very clear, so the fundamental problem therefore is logic. and understanding that logic. But that comes from both sides. So what I'd say is that if you go back thousands of years ago, 90% of everything that was achieved in the subcontinent is gone. It's simply the reality because of invaders or whatnot, it's all gone. But a lot of the scientific achievements that were then adopted by people who consecutive continue to move further west. That all happened at the exact same time that the Vedas were being pushed up, that Satyuga, Dwapara, that Treta, everyone had the luxury of transcending their consciousness and becoming closer, more and more detached from the material constraints, or what we would call the laws of physics, the things that bind our senses to understand things as what we can see tangibly. Right now, because being in the Kali Yuga, we are in a very low time, so we devote everything we have to devotional service, so we are much more emotionally intelligent, and we understand the nature of God from a much more personal view, which if was done much further back in every subsequent preceding yuga, may have achieved much more, and maybe we may not have yielded all those scientific achievements that happened side by side with those things. So what I think needs to happen is this clear understanding of both the scientific side of the aisle and the spiritual side of the aisle, that there is this logic that we're trying to come to. And by my own notion, and by what a lot of other even scientists say, including the ones, especially the ones that cannot publish, because they're not allowed to, they're being misunderstood by their own community, is that the logic really does suggest that God is there. And on top of that, it's not just saying that God is there. If you were to look at what we actually believe, that's why I distinguish faith from belief. I genuinely believe in Krishna because the logic is profound. There is accompanying logic to it, to suggest all these other things as to why God is there. Because the universe is here. It's so physical, it's so finite, it's so like this, and there should be infinite number of universes. There is mathematics and logic, even on the scientific side of the aisle, to show that these things are there, that there is that kind of thing. But even the genuine scientist who follows logic as a philosophy, not just facts, it's not just a facts versus faith argument, that kind of scientist, the true scientist, admits that at a certain point, the tools with which we use to gauge reality, which are also physical things, they break down. Even the mathematics breaks down. And you come to a point where you have to think of logic transcendentally. And that idea is that if...
The battery may have...
Okay, speak loud.
Yeah. And so that the idea is that God does not exist within the physical laws that we exist in. It's a derivative nature. And if God is at the top of all of that, then how can you describe by the same nature?
Yeah, no, it's a good argument. Yeah, it's a good point that he made, that it's, you can't use this evidence to prove this. He's beyond that. He's before that. He's primal.
So
Prabhupada is doing primeval.
He is the first cause.
He's the first cause. He's primal. You can't use anything after that to demonstrate that, because that's secondary, that's subsequent.
There's an infinite fertility, right?
Yeah.
The causal notion
Yeah.
and God's input. So that is probably the answer I'd give to that problem, which I don't see.
He's probably having
somewhere around.
yeah.
Is that the complexity that is God as a machine is not the same sort of complexity that are the physical constraints within which we observe things.
Yeah. That's a great answer. So I'm guilty now twice for going too far.
But those who are here, they do not feel the same way.
So, okay, so you're free to discuss if anyone wants to go. I think maybe everyone's gone. So these are very good points and very true. It's very fascinating. Prabhupada was very passionate and very enthusiastic, looking for the right word. He was very determined to have these discussions in society, because society is often misled by so-called scientists making propositions that aren't based on logic. They'll say this, they'll say that, and he said, well, but look, logically, if you look at this, that you can't say that. And yet, scientists in general, as a class, have a position of authority in society. And his angst or his difficulty was they don't have all the information, they're not even following their own logical processes, and they're misleading people. And the reason I quoted or mentioned that documentary is because the result of that misleading is then people get a whole distorted worldview, and you have atrocities and people getting killed and people being suppressed based on ignorance and based on a lack of logic and reason in any so-called scientific process. So it's great that you see that, and then you can help all of us to see that, and to he wanted very much the re-spiritualization of society, so that common people wouldn't be influenced by these false conceptions and directions, because this isn't taught in the schools, and it should be, because what they're teaching is based as much on some faith of some other nonsensical thing, that we have faith on things that are real and solidifiable and experiential. And that faith is, to your point, is much deeper. Faith and belief is so different. So.
On the lighter side, just quickly. It seems like Richard talking a little bit like Kamsa, because he's obsessed with killing God.
Yeah, he's thinking about him a lot. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so.
There's another professor named Professor Behan.
Behan.
He lives in Pennsylvania. He was also banned because he was talking about intelligence, special intelligence. Like actually, he was taking a device from the body, which basically runs the cells. I'm not getting the name of these cells, but he would take that device, which is situated in the body. What it does is it would transform the cells from one location back to the other location through the entire body. So basically, he's giving an argument that how come that this device would work? Because if everything came through Big Bang Theory, who created this device? It was so complex. I'm not getting the name.